So I want to welcome you all to the webinar today. This is the last one that we have in July. We'll be back in August. And I want to thank everyone who has come to these webinars. I know that this has been a really busy month and I noticed a lot of familiar names. So it's really nice to see you all again. And we're really, really grateful for your donations, which help us to run these webinars, and to our sponsors who have been supporting these educational webinars, which we started at the beginning of lockdown. We are supported by Oatly, which make amazing fortified plant-based milks and products, ProVeg International, which is an incredible group and supporting us for the next few webinars that we have, the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and everyone who attends the webinar today will also receive a CPD certificate from us, and that is accredited for 1 CPD hour. So do look out for that in your inbox. I would also like to introduce myself. My name is Rohini and I am on the advisory board at Plant-Based Health Professionals UK and a nutritionist. Plant-Based Health Professionals UK is a community interest group that is dedicated to promoting the benefits of sustainable diets and whole foods plant-based nutrition. And it was founded, and the director is Dr. Shireen Kassam, who we will have on a webinar in the next couple of months. Right. So we're really excited to have Lisa Simon, who's a registered dietitian, and I'm personally incredibly excited about this webinar. I think it's such an important topic, and she's not going to be talking only about women's health, but also male and female fertility and how a plant-based diet can impact this, as well as other lifestyle factors. So really looking forward to this one. We will also be putting up the link on our site, pbhp.uk/webinars, for the first webinar in August, which is with an international speaker, Dr. Yami, who is the most incredible plant-based pediatrician, and she has worked with children of all ages. And we're going to be discussing plant-based diets for children, safety, benefits, and special considerations. If you haven't listened to her podcast yet, I highly recommend it. And we're going to be discussing something that I think is an incredibly important issue, which is intuitive eating for children. How can you raise healthy plant-based eaters and foster a healthy relationship with food? Do join and support our work if you are interested in plant-based nutrition, and membership is open to everyone, not just health professionals. And you can visit pbhp.uk to sign up to our newsletters, which are quite regular. Our donation link is pbhp.uk/donate, and you can also follow us for regular updates and scientific analysis of the latest evidence on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So I'm just going to stop the presentation. So I'd like to welcome Lisa Simon to start her presentation. Just to give you a little bit of background on Lisa, she graduated in 2014 with a first-class honours degree in nutrition and dietetics. She then worked in the NHS for 2 years as a general dietitian before specialising in critical care and gastroenterology. In 2019, she made the difficult decision to leave the NHS and set up her own practice as a freelance dietitian. She sees clients from all over the world, and it's not limited by geography. So if you're interested in booking a consult with her, then visit tiptoptum.com. All consultations are via Zoom and telephone. And Lisa is also going to share her own personal story as well, which I'm really looking forward to hear, and share her incredible experience of fertility and diet. So Lisa, if you could turn on your video, then we can start the screen share and get started.
Okay, so I'm going to talk this evening about how you can optimise both male and female fertility with a plant-based diet. And it's really important to include the males in this discussion, because I think in terms of fertility, the focus tends to be very much on the female, and the males tend to get pushed aside a little bit. And you know, obviously that both male and female contribute equally to making a baby. So I'm going to go through the presentation first, and then, as Rohini said, share my personal story at the end. So the World Health Organization define infertility as the inability of a sexually active non-contraception couple to achieve pregnancy in 1 year, And it affects 1 in 7 couples. So, a significant amount of couples are affected by infertility. And in 2017, more than 54,000 people underwent artificial reproductive technology. So that's ICSI and IVF. And IVF actually increased by 2.5% from the previous year. Now, there's a lot of misinformation out there in terms of how you can improve your fertility with diet. And there's a lot of false hope that gets given as a result of this. And also it can actually risk the health of mum and baby as well. Now, the evidence I'm going to talk about tonight relates to ovulatory infertility only. So I'm not talking about blocked fallopian tubes or structural defects. There are several conditions associated with infertility, and they include polycystic ovary syndrome or PCOS, celiac disease. So this should always be excluded. If a female presents with unexplained infertility, celiac disease should always be excluded because it's thought that around 75% of women remain undiagnosed. And there is evidence that if a gluten-free diet is strictly adhered to, then some degree of fertility does come back. Also diabetes, so type 1, 2 and other autoimmune conditions. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to go through every one of these tonight, but I am just going to touch on polycystic ovaries because it is such a prevalent condition and makes such an impact in terms of fertility. So it affects 12 to 18% of Western women, but in obesity, this increases to 1 in 3. So a significant amount of women are affected. Now, it's a complicated condition and multifactorial, but in some it's linked to androgen excess, so that's male sex hormones. Now, it's completely normal for the ovaries to produce small amounts of androgens, and these are usually converted into, most of them are converted into estrogens, but in polycystic ovaries, the ovaries produce excess androgens, and also the adrenal glands that lie just above the kidneys, they also produce androgens. And this then results in high levels of circulating and excess hormones. And that causes the symptoms of polycystic ovaries. So things like acne, unwanted facial hair, hair loss on the scalp. And with your periods, it can either cause prolonged and very heavy periods or a very irregular or absent cycle. And these women can be underweight or a healthy weight. It's not just in overweight or obesity. In others, it's linked to abdominal obesity and insulin resistance. So a high proportion of women with polycystic ovaries are thought to be insulin resistant. And when your body doesn't respond to the actions of insulin, then your body will produce more insulin to make up for that. And also in overweight and obesity, the body produces more insulin. And what that does is then increases the production and action of the androgens. So you have this almost ongoing cycle of excess hormones and symptoms. Now, there are 2 key aims of treatment, and that's weight management and blood glucose control. And because insulin resistance, polycystic ovaries is a condition that's linked to an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, it's really important that women with PCOS get screened for insulin resistance. And with dietary treatment, there's emerging strong evidence for anti-inflammatory foods, and that basically equates to a whole food, plant-based diet and fibre. And I've put fibre in capital letters because it is so important that you get enough fibre in the diet with PCOS. And the reason for that is because fibre acts on hormones as it does with cholesterol. So the liver is constantly filtering out all the toxins in your body and other things, and that includes hormones. And they go through into your gut, and if there isn't enough fibre in your gut to bind with those hormones and remove them in your stool, they will be reabsorbed into the body, and it will continue the cycle of excessive hormones and hormonal imbalance. So fibre is really important, and we should be aiming for 30 grams a day, if not more. Now, the preconception period, it's really, really vital that healthcare professionals understand the importance of the preconception period, because it's a crucial time for optimising fertility and pregnancy outcomes, and also for the prevention of chronic disease later in life for mother and child. And I'll touch a little bit on that a bit later on. Now, the link between diet and fertility isn't new. We can trace it back as far as the ancient Greeks, and Hippocrates himself recommended a fertility diet for women, but also included men. And he advised that men should be well nourished with appropriate foods and should avoid alcohol. So, you know, it was significant even then. And it continued through the Middle Ages. So women again were given special fertility diets, and the men were told to have almonds with aniseed and salt to improve their sperm health. In the 19th century, undernutrition tended to be the reason for infertility, and it does apply still today in some areas, but the vast majority of cases is to do with overnutrition. So can a plant-based diet optimise fertility? Well, it's really important to stress, and I do say this to every one of my clients, is that no single food or diet can guarantee pregnancy, and anyone who says that is giving false hope. But there are a range of plant-based foods that have been shown to be beneficial to fertility. And I'm going to go through those now. So I'm going to start with male fertility, and it's important to remember it takes two to tango. So I always consider the couple as a whole. And even if the male doesn't attend the consult with his partner, I will always ask for a 3-day food diary and some information on his diet and lifestyle as well. So 40 to 50 cases of infertility are actually due to male factors, so really significant. So it's basically half and half. And there are four really, the four most influential lifestyle factors are diet, tobacco and drugs, exercise and stress. But we should also consider weight and environmental factors, because these contribute approximately 40%. So environmental factors are things like pollution. So for example, when you're in your car, don't go too close to the car in front in a traffic jam, because then all the fumes are going to come in to your car. So, you know, keep a fair distance when you're in your car. In the house, look at your household cleaning products, and if there's if you can swap any for, you know, non-chemical ones, then great. And also things like washing fruit and vegetables really well. And there isn't as much evidence for weight with men, but it's all, you know, it's always a good thing to be within the healthy BMI range and not overweight or underweight. Now, things that are detrimental to semen quality are processed and red meat, alcohol outside of the guidelines. So men and women should be aiming for a maximum of 14 units a week. And that should be spread over at least 3 days, with at least 2 days without alcohol. And 14 units isn't actually as much as you might think. So it's roughly a pint of lager or a large glass of wine. That's is 3 units. So the 14 units can add up quite quickly. Also sugar sweetened drinks and caffeine from soft drinks. So these should be avoided completely during the preconception period for men. And also too much caffeine from tea or coffee. So there's less evidence with tea and coffee than with soft drinks, but I would avoid having more than about 4 cups of coffee and about 6 cups of tea a day for males. And also there's evidence that poor sleep can affect male fertility, specifically less than 6 hours. And interestingly, actually, if you have too much sleep, it's thought to affect fertility as well. So the optimum sleep is between 7 and 8 hours a night. Now, sperm is very susceptible to damage by free radicals because of the polyunsaturated fatty acid rich membrane. And there are various nutrients that are vital for sperm development. So sperm takes approximately 3 months to develop. And then once it's developed, it needs protecting. So vitamin D is an important nutrient. There are receptors in the testicles and sperm, and it may be involved in the actions of acrosine, which is a digestive enzyme which is critical for fertilization. Now, the main source of vitamin D is sunlight, but there are lots of different factors that can affect the amount of sunlight that the UV rays, sorry, that you absorb. And that includes things like pollution, cloud cover. Those with dark skin absorb less. If you have most of your body covered, if you work indoors a lot and you don't get outside. So it's really important also to have plenty of fortified non-dairy milks and yogurts. And mushrooms, you can either buy them already bathed and increased content of vitamin D, or you can expose them to sunlight. So you need to expose them on your windowsill with the window open, because the UVB rays can't actually penetrate glass, or just pop them outside on your lawn, or somewhere where they're safe to be left. The recommendation during the winter in the UK, and at the moment during COVID, is 10 microgram supplement a day. But I would actually recommend that males take a supplement throughout the time they are trying to conceive. Folate, there are no current recommendations for men during the preconception period, but folate is needed for synthesis of DNA in sperm, and it acts as an antioxidant as well, so it protects against free radicals that can damage the sperm. Now with men, I would analyse the diet, and if I didn't think that they'd be able to increase the folate sufficiently in their diet, if they had poor diet, or they weren't confident themselves, then I may suggest a folic acid supplement in the same way that I would say to a woman that you must be taking a folic acid supplement. Now, folic acid is a synthetic form of folate, so it's 1.7 times more bioavailable than the folate that you get from food, which is why women are advised to take folic acid to prevent neural tube defects. And sources include fruit and veg, especially green leafy veg, like in the picture there, fortified foods and legumes, so beans, chickpeas, lentils, that kind of thing. Zinc is again an important nutrient for male fertility. It's needed for sperm development and motility. And sources include oats, fortified breakfast cereal, firm tofu, seeds, avocados, quinoa. And it's important, if you want to increase the bioavailability even more of zinc and other minerals, that you can soak or sprout your grains and your legumes. And I always actually advise men to have a handful of seeds a day as a snack, because they're such a good source of zinc. It has antioxidant properties and exerts a protective effect on sperm structure and abnormalities. An absent mid-piece of sperm is associated with zinc deficiency, and zinc seminal plasma levels have shown to be higher in fertile men. And men lose zinc through each ejaculation, so their requirements are slightly higher than women at 9.5 milligrams. And I've put the sources there again, so ignore those ones. Selenium is an essential trace element, and the requirements for males are 75 micrograms a day. So selenium can protect the sperm DNA, but the mechanism isn't well understood. But deficiency is associated again with mid-piece abnormalities and reduced motility. Brazil nuts are the best source of selenium, but the content does vary widely depending on where they're grown and the soil they're grown in. So there is a risk of selenium toxicity if you have too much. So I would advise to have a maximum of 2 Brazil nuts daily, and also have grains, seeds and fortified foods as well. Vitamin C, so the recommended nutrient intake is 40 milligrams a day, and vitamin C is 10 times higher in seminal plasma than in blood serum, and it acts as an antioxidant, so it neutralizes those free radicals that can damage the sperm. And in infertile men with poor motility, they've been shown to have lower levels of vitamin C and higher levels of free radicals. Vitamin C also helps the absorption of non-heme iron, so it's really important to have a source of vitamin C with every meal. And I do talk a little bit more about iron later on, so I'll save the rest of the information for then. Lycopene is a really interesting one. There have been a lot of studies on lycopene and male fertility. It's a carotenoid and it's fat soluble, and it's the red pigment in fruit and vegetables. So unlike other carotenoids, for example, beta-carotene in sweet potato and butternut squash, it can't be converted into vitamin A, but it is a highly efficient antioxidant, and it's actually thought to be twice as effective as beta-carotene. But the important thing is to make sure you're having varied carotenoids in your diet. So lycopene is highly concentrated in the testes and also in the prostate, the liver and the adrenals, and it's thought to be 10 times higher in these tissues. And the reasons aren't exactly clear, but it's thought that it may have something to do with the number of lipoprotein receptors in these tissues. And because lycopene is fat soluble, it attaches to those receptors. And it may enhance the antioxidant capacity of sperm. Now, the absorption is decreased with advanced age, smoking and alcohol. So you should definitely avoid smoking anyway, and avoid excessive alcohol or drinking alcohol with sources of lycopene. And the absorption is increased when cooked and eaten alongside other fats. So in most of these studies, tomato juice has been used as the food, as the source of lycopene. So I would advise a glass of tomato juice and a handful of almonds to get that fat in. And also almonds are a great source of vitamin E. So vitamin E again is an antioxidant, and there's a direct relationship observed between vitamin E levels. So I'm just going to move my there. Between vitamin E levels in seminal plasma and the percentage of motile sperm. And lower levels have been found in the semen of infertile men. So sources include, like I just said, almonds, avocados, sunflower seeds, and butternut squash. They're just some examples there. In terms of iron, it's widely known that iron is important for females, especially during pregnancy, but it's not just important for women in terms of fertility. A deficiency or an excess of iron has been linked to defective sperm cell development, decreased libido, which obviously isn't ideal if you're trying to conceive, damage to sperm, fertility impairment, and it's interesting actually with the excess, the body absorbs heme iron from meat very readily, too readily, whereas with non-heme iron, it's not absorbed as easily. So it won't be possible, or it isn't possible to exceed your iron intake with a plant-based diet, but it could be possible when eating animal products. And because non-heme iron isn't absorbed as quickly, as easily, as I said earlier, you need to include a source of vitamin C. So I've put the picture of the sources there, but also there are things that prevent the absorption or hinder the absorption. And those include wine, tea, coffee, and calcium supplements. So if you need to be on calcium supplements for any reason, take them in between meals, not with meals, and avoid drinking tea, coffee, and wine with your meals as well. And I probably leave it at least 2 hours either side. Now with female fertility, all of the things I've just discussed apply as well. So all those micronutrients. But there's one important addition, and that's iodine. And iodine isn't as well known in terms of fertility. It's an essential mineral involved in thyroid function. And your thyroid is located in your neck, and it's shaped in the front of your neck, and it's shaped like a butterfly, which is actually quite apt because it's just as delicate and it can be unbalanced very, very easily. Now, without iodine in your diet, your thyroid is unable to make hormones. So it makes the hormones T3 and T4, and your body also converts T4 into T3, which is the active form. The thyroid will trap the iodine in your bloodstream as it passes through, and actually contains 80% of your body's entire iodine content. And it's really important that the woman's stores are adequate before pregnancy, so during the preconception period. And that's because it's needed to mature eggs and for the normal brain development of the fetus. And it's also needed to maintain the pregnancy during the first trimester. So there's a 4 times higher risk of miscarriage between weeks 4 to 8 if thyroid function is poor. So from week 12, the fetus's thyroid starts to work by itself, and by around 18 weeks, it's not reliant on the mum's supply, but it's really important still that the mum has an adequate intake of iodine in the diet. The World Health Organization recommend 150 microgram supplement maximum, as well as fortified foods. And although seaweed is a great source of iodine, it's not actually recommended as a regular source because the content varies so widely, and especially in kelp. Kelp contains very high amounts of iodine, and I was saying, how delicate the thyroid is, that if you take in too much iodine, it can really upset the balance and cause quite significant health problems. So always make sure you take a supplement, but a maximum of 150 micrograms. Weight is very important in terms of female fertility. And whereas the normal healthy BMI range is between 19 and 25, in terms of fertility, the optimum BMI range seems to be between 20 and 24. So if you are over that BMI range, a 5 to 10% weight loss has been shown to be effective in terms of fertility, but some women will need a lot more than that. And it's very important that they get support to do this safely. And the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, or NICE, actually promotes the role of the multidisciplinary team during the preconception period. And it's vital to highlight that there is support available, because many women don't think that there is support available during preconception period. And a healthy weight reduces the pregnancy risk and also improves the health of the child. And obesity is associated with a 3 times higher risk of infertility. Now, the effects of being overweight and obese, so sex hormones, so that's androgens, estrogen, progesterone, are stored and converted in adipose tissue, so in fat tissue, but the bioavailability and delivery to the target sites is reduced when you are overweight. And that's partly because of something called sex hormone binding globulin. And that's a protein that's in your body, and it basically grabs hold of excessive hormones and it keeps them inactive until they're needed. But if you're having too many hormones in the body and too little of these carrier proteins, then you quickly get higher levels of estrogen, testosterone circulating in the body. And this then results in the symptoms of polycystic ovaries, so excess hair growth, acne, and irregular ovulation, for example. Being overweight also impacts on the development and the quality of the embryo, and it can actually affect the ability of the embryo to implant in the uterus. And that's thought to be because when you are overweight or obese, you have a constant low-grade level of inflammation in the body, and that includes the uterus. And an inflamed uterus is not a receptive environment for an embryo to implant. And there's also an increased risk of leptin resistance in the child. And this is due to fetal programming. So fetal programming is a process during pregnancy when the baby's organs are growing and the function undergoes programming. And there are certain factors in pregnancy that can interfere with this process and actually cause permanent changes in the way that different organs function. So in overnutrition, it can cause sorry, I've lost my line of thought. In overnutrition, it can result in permanent changes to appetite and energy regulation later in life, with an increased risk of leptin resistance. So this means that the appetite suppressing action is actually compromised. So the child can fail to recognize fullness cues and then be at more risk of overeating and becoming overweight and obese themselves. Being underweight is equally as damaging to fertility. And when you are underweight, it can cause your menstrual cycle to be disrupted and also compromise your immune system so that you're at increased risk of infection and inflammation. And you're also at risk of nutritional deficiencies, which then cause higher risk of pregnancy complications. So you can have intrauterine growth restriction, so small baby for age, an increased risk of neural tube defects, and also a risk of a preterm birth. And also there's an increased risk of the child developing chronic conditions. So again, it's the fetal programming. And in underweight, the nutrients are directed to the brain, because the brain is favoured during the development process. And that's at the expense of other organs. So you can actually have an increased risk later in life of diseases like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and renal disease as well. So as healthcare professionals, how can we help? Well, in terms of helping patients lose weight or identify problems, we can use screening tools. And screening tools are a really important and easy tool that we can use in consultations. And patients may not be confident to manage their weight. They might not have the knowledge, the skills, or the self-determination needed. And so screening tools identify individuals who may need referral to a dietitian. And it's really important that these patients are identified. And it's, we should also be, healthcare professionals should be recognising the importance of the preconception period, as I said earlier. And similar to sperm, an egg takes approximately 100 days to mature. So it's really important that during this time that nutrition is optimised. And we can also rule out other causes of infertility, like I was saying earlier with celiac disease, for example. And hemoglobin levels should be checked at baseline as well. So the GP can check and do a full blood count. Now, I've just put up an example of a really simple screening tool that can be used in clinics to identify these patients. So first of all, it's really important that we ask permission to discuss weight, because it can be a very sensitive subject, and it's really important that it's approached in the right way. So once you've had that discussion, then you can ask the following questions. So it's 3 very simple questions. You calculate the patient's BMI. You ask whether the patient is aware of the risk of being underweight or overweight on fertility and pregnancy. And then you ask whether they are confident to manage their weight during the preconception period and during pregnancy. And then you add up the scores to determine the level of intervention. So it goes, if they don't score at all, then you just encourage and support the patient to monitor their weight. If they score between 1 and 2, then you can give advice on how they can optimise their weight status and also help them to monitor their weight. So, for example, you can give them resources and you can weigh at each appointment as well. And then if they score 3 or more, then they should be referred to a dietitian to have further help. Now, exercise is a bit of a funny one, because there's lots of evidence that saying different things. And I've just picked out this one study because I found it very interesting. It's a study by Rich Edwards et al. And they looked at 830 women who were trying to conceive. And they found that high intensity exercise doesn't reduce fertility, but may actually enhance fertility. And that moderate has no effect, so it doesn't help or hinder. And they found that there's a 5% reduced risk of ovulatory infertility with every hour per week of exercise. And if you do 5 hours a week, that reduces your risk by 25%. Now, they do say that it's the maintenance of healthy body weight that's key. So this might not apply to competitive athletes or marathon runners who tend to have very low body fat and maybe a very low weight as well. And they just put a table together where they showed the percentage reduction in risk in ovulatory infertility. And you can see that jogging and running has a lower risk than, say, aerobics and biking, but they all have a percentage reduction. Now, it is an interesting study, but there isn't enough evidence for me to change my current recommendations and also for the guidelines for optimising fertility. And there's also, I need to see more studies on the effects of cortisol, so the stress on fertility, and the cortisol levels increase when you do very, very high intensity exercise. So my recommendations are still that men and women should do regular moderate exercise. So that's exercise that increases the heart rate, but you can still hold a conversation. And you should be aiming to do exercise at least 5 times a week, really, for 30 minutes, and also incorporate some strength building exercise in there as well. So that can be anything from body weight exercises to to light weights. And again, just be careful that you're not overdoing the strength exercise and lifting ridiculously heavy weights, because again, that might not be good in terms of fertility. So AGEs, these are compounds, they stand for advanced glycation end products, and they're compounds that form within the body when sugar molecules attach to proteins. And there are a number of complications associated with AGEs in terms of diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and it may also exacerbate the symptoms of polycystic ovaries. So AGEs cause proteins to stick together, which then results in a stiff mass of rigid tissue and also stiffening of blood vessels. So that's why AGEs are implicated in diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And in uterine tissue, especially in overweight women, it can have an adverse effect on fertility. And that's because they cause even more inflammation. And in men, it can reduce the quality of the DNA in sperm. And the way that the AGEs act are via receptors called RAGEs, and it induces this pro-inflammatory cascade. So for at least a month, these pro-inflammatory agents promote inflammation in the body. And this then triggers further production of the receptors so that more AGEs can attach to them. And this then causes a positive feedback loop. So it's really vital to reduce dietary AGEs. And it's estimated that 30% are absorbed, but even the unabsorbed ones travel to the large intestine, and that promotes the growth of pathogenic bacteria, which then affects your gut microbiome. So they can have some, pretty serious consequences. So how can we reduce them in our diet? Well, primarily by following a diverse whole food plant-based diet. So the main source of AGEs in the diet is meat, and meat that has been cooked so that the brown layer forms on it, so grilled or barbecued, any dry frying method or dry cooking method. So with a whole food plant-based diet, you have very, very low intakes of AGEs. But if you're not following a whole food plant-based diet and you're following a vegan diet, which is very, very different, you should be avoiding sugar-sweetened drinks, processed foods, added sugars, toast, which is an odd one, but when you toast bread, then the brown layer that forms on the bread, that's the AGEs forming. So it's better to avoid toasting your bread. And also the advice is to cut the crusts off your bread as well, because most of the AGEs form in the crust. And also don't smoke. Again, when tobacco burns, that produces the AGEs as well, and then obviously that goes straight into your body. So with the cooking methods, you should avoid dry cooking where possible and add moisture. So things like casseroling, poaching, steaming, and slow cooking. So moving on to macronutrients, carbohydrates are massively important in the diet. And it's a very common misconception, unfortunately it seems to be growing, that women should be following low carbohydrates, which means high protein diets to improve their fertility. And this is absolutely not the case. And there's a phrase that, not all carbs are equal, and that's very, very true. So carbohydrates provide vital nutrients and energy. So low carbohydrate diet should be avoided at all costs, because the evidence is that carbohydrates, but the right carbohydrates, can actually improve fertility. And it's all about quality, not quantity. So we should be choosing low glycemic index carbohydrates, which basically means high fiber carbohydrates, which are whole grains, and then beans and vegetables and fruit. And the research is that actually when you include whole grains in the diet during the preconception period, and generally, it reduces the risk of gestational diabetes. So yes, we should be avoiding refined carbohydrates, so white bread, pasta, white rice, and added sugars, but we should definitely not be avoiding whole grains, carbohydrates, fruit and vegetables. Now moving on to fats, these are essential for energy and to support cell growth. And there are 4 major dietary fats. So we have saturated, trans fats, MUFAs, which are monounsaturated fatty acids, and polyunsaturated fatty acids. And all fats contain the same amount of energy per gram, whether it's saturated, trans, polyunsaturated, but they have very different effects on fertility. So evidence is that avoiding trans fats may improve fertility, and these are commonly found in commercially produced products, and we should be avoiding trans fats anyway for our general health. And the evidence is that if you replace monounsaturated fatty acids with trans fats, that can more than double the risk of ovulatory infertility. Now with men, saturated and trans fats are associated with lower semen qualities and markers of poor testicular function. And PUFAs are important. As I said earlier, the sperm it has a high concentration of PUFAs. So sunflower seeds, oils, walnuts, I've cut that off with a picture there, but that should say flax seeds and chia seeds, otherwise known as omega-3s. And females, it's the monounsaturated fatty acids that are important, so nuts, avocados, olive oil, and olives. Protein, the evidence is that replacing animal with plant protein can increase fertility, and that specifically swapping 25 grams of animal protein for 25 grams of plant protein actually reduces the risk of ovulation infertility by 50%. And animal protein during pregnancy is linked to an increased risk of being overweight and obese by 20 years old. And sources of protein in a plant-based diet, well, they're everywhere, but soy, beans, lentils, whole grains, nuts, and even vegetables and fruit contain small amounts of protein. Now, there are many supplements marketed to improve fertility, and actually when you go onto some of these websites, they tend to have success stories of couples with a baby who claim that they've gone through IVF, no success, and then they start taking these supplements and suddenly within months they're pregnant. Again, this just causes false hope, and there's no evidence behind some of these supplements at all. So this is one I found when I was doing some research. The claims were that it increases likelihood of conception by 447%. So that's a huge claim there. And if you think, people who are desperate to conceive, they're going to be taken in by that and be more likely to buy these supplements. The other claims were that it increases sperm to egg binding rate, it ensures healthy cervical mucus levels, and promotes cycle regularity. And then in very small letters right at the bottom, it says these statements have not been validated by the Food and Drug Administration. So basically there's no evidence behind any of these claims. The problem with multivitamin and single supplements is that they can often exceed the recommended nutrient intake. And sometimes they are very large doses. So a couple of examples here: vitamin C, that's sold up to 1,000 milligrams, where the RNI is 45 milligrams. And even though vitamin C is water soluble, it's lost in urine. It's not going to do you any harm, but it's a very expensive way of taking in vitamin C. And also there can be gastrointestinal side effects, so nausea, constipation, diarrhea. Another example is vitamin E, and this is a fat-soluble vitamin. And you can see there that the FSA, the Food Standard Agency, recommend a maximum intake of 540 milligrams. And some of them are in excess of 700 milligrams. And the excess is stored in the liver, and it's not, high levels of vitamin E have actually been shown to be harmful. So what should we be taking? Well, for women, folic acid, 400 micrograms daily as soon as you try to conceive. There are studies that have shown 800 micrograms to be beneficial during IVF treatment, but at the moment the evidence isn't strong enough to change the recommendations. Some groups will need much higher doses of 5 milligrams, and you need to just check with your GP if you fall into those groups. So some examples are in obesity, in diabetes, and if you're taking anti-epileptic medication. Iodine, as I said earlier, 150 microgram daily. Vitamin D, I would always recommend that. And also vitamin B12, which you should be taking anyway if you're following a plant-based diet. But in terms of fertility, deficiency has been linked to subfertility in women, and it's also important for healthy DNA in sperm as well. So there's no point taking a really mega dose vitamin B12 supplement because we don't absorb very much of it at all. So I would recommend 2.5 microgram supplement daily, as well as regular fortified foods. And the best way to do that is nutritional yeast and fortified plant milks as well. Preconception multivitamins are fine, but they are often costly. They can significantly exceed requirements. The optimum dose of antioxidants isn't known, so some of them contain much higher doses than there should be really. And also there's a risk that they will replace the nutrients from food, and this shouldn't happen. So I'm really aware of the time, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. But my husband and I tried to conceive for 2 years, and we thought that it was going to happen really easily because we have an 11-year-old son already. But I was diagnosed with secondary infertility, and it was because my menstrual cycle was so irregular for 12 years, or probably more actually, before the birth of my eldest. So his conception was a bit of a miracle, really. We decided, because of my age, I was 37, that we would go straight for IVF, and we were told that that there was only a 23% chance of it being successful, so not great odds. And it was during treatment that I discovered plant-based nutrition. And initially I was skeptical, I have to say, because during my training we were told to advise lean meats and fish and dairy for calcium. And I thought, I don't want to be doing anything that's going to put the health of my potential baby at risk, which is very ironic. But I did start to transition, so I cut out meat, but I still was eating fish because I thought oily fish was important, and eggs and dairy. And it wasn't until my baby was actually diagnosed at 6 weeks old with cow's milk protein allergy that I went plant-based, fully plant-based overnight, because I was breastfeeding. So I stopped dairy and then just decided to stop everything else as well. And I've never looked back. And the fascinating thing from my point of view is that when my periods returned after birth, I had complete restoration of a normal menstrual cycle. So I have been 28 days on the dot ever since. So within 2 months of starting a whole food plant-based diet, I had a complete restoration of my menstrual cycle. And I thought that was absolutely, well, you can't say anything more, can you? And then I thought I'd put a little picture of him at the end because he's so cute, and I know I'm biased, but there we are. So my take-home messages are that male and female should be treated as two halves of a whole. Both can use food and nutrition to optimize fertility. Preconception is a very vital time, and the aim should be to get the majority of nutrients from whole foods. And this can be done by eating as varied a plant-based diet as possible, ensuring adequate intakes of essential macro and micronutrients, achieve a healthy weight prior to pregnancy and as close to a healthy BMI as possible prior to pregnancy, and take folic acid, iodine, B12 and vitamin D supplements. So thank you for listening, and my references are there at the end.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Lisa. I literally was making notes and typing. There's about 25 questions, I think, in the Q&A box. So we might go a little bit over time, everyone, but if you have to go, then we understand. What I have done is mention in the chat the links to Lisa's Instagram and website, and she shares some of her incredible meals on Instagram and her website, articles. She also has produced the most exceptional fact sheet for plant-based health professionals UK on fertility. So we're really excited.
With Kate's help.
So you can go to pvhp.uk and have a look at that. I'll just get it open so I can share it on my screen just a sec with everyone. But yeah, I think let's kick off with the questions. I think one of the questions that I had was, if you're interested in, if you're not sure whether or not you're going to have a baby, at what point is it important to start making lifestyle and dietary changes? Is it something, and I know some people kind of go, okay, I'm going to go on a health kick and try to get pregnant. Is it something that you should be doing much more in advance, and what would be appropriate and what would you recommend?
I'd say as soon as possible, really. It's important for general health anyway to follow a healthy diet and exercise Oh, there it is. But I'd say definitely if you're thinking of trying to conceive, definitely 3 months at least before you try to conceive is the optimum time.
I've just put up the fact sheet there so that everyone can see how beautiful it is, and it's actually a couple of pages long, and this is a really great resource for healthcare professionals as well who are listening in. This is something you can just simply refer to your patients, and it should be really helpful. Stop the sharing again. That was really helpful. Thank you, Lisa. One of the more niche questions, but I think it's an interesting one from Laura is it safe to drink kombucha whilst trying to conceive and or while pregnant? Kombucha, for those who might not be aware, is a fermented tea-based drink, and it's considered a fermented food.
It's definitely fine during the preconception period. Pregnancy is another matter, and I'm not an expert in terms of pregnancy.
So I had to look, and I know that there are no large studies that have been done on kombucha, but because it does contain some caffeine as well as a small amount of alcohol, it would be best avoided. And especially for anyone who's at risk of gestational diabetes, it's rather high in sugar as well. So it'd be better to stick to, I think, all your recommendations about water and like non-caffeinated herbal drinks and things like that would be much better, like chamomile.
Yeah. I didn't actually touch on the caffeine, but for women who are trying to conceive, I would say that I would probably stick to the caffeine recommendations during pregnancy, just in case you do conceive and you're not aware of the fact that you've conceived. So it's quite low, the caffeine recommendations during pregnancy. So I just probably maybe switch to decaf coffee whilst you're trying to conceive, or just have herbal teas or non-caffeinated herbal teas and water.
That's really helpful. Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. One of the questions that we got was about lifestyle changes, and it was, what's your opinion on iPads and iPhones on sperm quality? And do you have an opinion on hot showers and tight-fitting underwear? And women. And it's actually my mother who's asking that, who's a gynecologist.
Yeah, with men, I would definitely recommend too much heat around the groin area, and it's quite well known that regular cyclists actually have higher rates of infertility. So anything that's going to put pressure there, a lot of heat around that area, for prolonged periods of time is best avoided. I think if you're having, I don't think a shower will cause too much of a problem, but as long as you're not standing under there for excessive amounts of time. But I'd avoid things like hot tubs and saunas and things like that whilst you're trying to conceive for men. What was the first part of the question? Sorry.
It was about iPads and iPhones, and
I don't think there's a huge amount of evidence as far as that's concerned, but certainly avoid having them on your lap, because they do get quite hot. So always have them on a stand if you're going to be working on a laptop.
And try to minimize screen time anyway, because that obviously contributes to stress. And one of the questions is one that is really important, because we know that iron is the most prevalent nutritional disorder worldwide. And it was really good question about what are the strategies that you recommend to increase iron levels in someone who might not have optimum iron levels, and we know that's important for pregnancy in particular.
Yeah, well, I've always had problems myself with iron. I had to have an iron infusion when I was pregnant, so I always make sure I follow my own advice about not having tea and coffee with. I think women do find, or people do find it difficult, especially at breakfast, to not have tea and coffee with their breakfast. But I would always say either have a tea or coffee first, if that's what you want, and then wait at least an hour, 10, possibly 2 hours to have your breakfast, so you're not interfering with the absorption. Always have lots of fresh fruit with your breakfast to increase the iron absorption, so the vitamin C. I wouldn't recommend having fruit juice. I'd always say have it from the whole fruit with your breakfast. And you can also soak your grains. So soak your oats overnight, soak your beans, your lentils, your whole grains, and that will break down phytates, which bind the minerals, so the zinc and the iron and calcium and the others. And that will increase the availability. You can also sprout your grains, so I do that a lot as well, and that increases the iron content. And there's lots of instructions online of how to sprout safely at home, and I've also done a post on it a while back though, so you'd have to scroll quite far back, I think. And also just avoid having wine with your meals, because that stops it from being absorbed.
Red wine, I think, in particular, because of the high tannin levels. And someone is asking, is decaf okay, or would you? I think that it still does contain some tannins, I think.
Yeah, it's not the caffeine that stops the iron absorption. So yeah, decaf would do the same thing.
Great. So as someone who's worked on the NHS, one of the questions from one of our members, Colette Fox, is do couples trying to conceive and undergoing fertility treatment on the NHS or privately, do they typically get nutrition advice to enhance their chances of conception?
Well, the worrying thing that's my big bugbear, the worrying thing that's coming out at the moment, and a lot of my clients are telling me, is that they're being advised to follow low carbohydrate diets. And they're being advised by the IVF clinics. And as far as I know, it's the private clinics. I don't know about the NHS. I wouldn't have thought it would be the NHS, to be honest. But they're telling their patients to have as low a carbohydrate diet as possible, and to concentrate on lean meat, eggs, fish, to try and optimize their fertility. And obviously that goes against everything that the evidence points to. So I would say to all the healthcare professionals out there as well that may be giving this advice, is that to please stop giving that advice, and to make it very clear that carbohydrates are very, very important. But like I said, it's the type of carbohydrates. So whole grains, low glycemic index carbohydrates, and you should always have a source with every meal. And I always say for the composition of your meal, to have half a plate of vegetables, and then a quarter of a plate carbohydrates, so whole grains, quarter of a plate of non-processed protein sources as well.
I think your Instagram is such a wealth of like porridge recipes and things like that. So rich in iron and soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, and it's just a really great one, I think, especially if someone's watching that iron as well. So and overnight
oats. I have a slight obsession with porridge, as everyone knows who follows me.
And what do you advise if your fertility doctor or your gynecologist is not on board? What would you recommend that people do in that case?
Not on board with a plant-based diet?
Yeah, for people who are listening, who might be listening.
It's really tricky, because I come across this all the time, and I'm bringing up my son fully plant-based, and I've had a lot of resistance from healthcare professionals about bringing him up plant-based. And it's tricky, but you just have to say, maybe arm yourself with a bit of evidence that you can just kind of relay off the top of your head, maybe a study you can refer to, and say, this is the evidence, this is what I am choosing to do, and I would appreciate it if you would support me in my choices, and say,
like, arming yourself with the evidence, as well as having a look at all the resources that we have on plant-based health professionals. We have a directory as well, which is growing, of plant-based experts such as yourself, registered dietitians and nutritionists and things, who may be able to help and give you the right information. So it is out there, and there are lots of resources, and people, I guess, just need to kind of get that knowledge and go in prepared with that.
Yes, and the evidence can't be ignored anymore. It's just continuing to grow.
I completely agree. What are your thoughts about, obviously, I think there's a lot of split, even in the plant-based community, really, about low-fat diets and about completely following a whole foods plant-based diet that is low in fat, so around 10% fat or around that amount, what would you say for someone who is looking at having a baby? Is that a suitable way of eating for that person?
I say no. Fats are really important. It is very split in the plant-based world, but I think in terms of cardiovascular health, then yes, you know, a low-fat plant-based diet has its place. But in terms of fertility, you do need an adequate amount of fat in your diet, but it's a type of fat. So you're avoiding saturated fat, and on a whole food plant-based diet, you do that anyway, as long as you're not having coconut oil, which is higher in fat than lard. So sticking to, and you know, personally, I choose not to have oils in my diet, but I have plenty of whole food sources of fat. So you're looking at making sure you're having things like avocado, tahini, sesame seeds, other seeds, nuts, nut butters. You know, all these things are a really important part of a diet in terms of fertility.
I completely agree, and that, like as you mentioned, like the importance of seeds even for men and things, especially for men, that was really, really interesting. I think that kind of, I love how you kind of draw into the specifics of what we need to focus on as well, because kind of talking about it, people can sometimes also not eat enough on a plant-based diet. That is one of the things that we talked about before we got on the webinar, about how I think a lot of plant-based foods are generally, you know, less calorie dense, which is great for sort of healthy weight management, but you can unintentionally lose weight as well. And it's important then to add in those healthy fats as well. Make sure you're eating enough.
Really important. Yeah, I think that's a common mistake that a lot of people make when they first transition, and I actually made it myself, because you're cutting out a lot of calories and saturated fat from animal products, and on a whole food plant-based diet, you're eating much less energy dense foods. So it's really important to make sure that you eat enough and listen to your body, and if you feel hungry or if you feel that you're losing weight, then it's a sign that you're not eating enough. So just increase your portion sizes slightly and include some healthy snacks in between your meals if you are starting to lose weight.
Yeah, that's really great advice. So I think we've got time for just a couple more questions. One of the questions that's come up a few times is about BMI measurements and seeing that inaccuracy on an individual level. Is that something that you still recommend? Would you recommend people asking about waist circumference? Is that something that could be used instead of the BMI measurement?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, BMI is a difficult one, because if you have a lot of muscle mass, then you can sometimes come out as being obese when you're clearly not. So it is important to look at waist circumference as well, especially because a risk factor, you know, is fat around the middle, especially with polycystic ovaries as well. So you can, but it's generally about, I mean, you know whether you're overweight or whether you're obese. So while BMI is a useful tool, it doesn't always apply to everyone. So yeah, the other methods, and even, you know, mid-arm circumference, waist measurements, they're all helpful tools.
That's great. And then one question, we've had lots of questions about supplements, and that's not surprising because there's just such a huge market out there when it comes to supplements, and how you mentioned folic acid, and someone is asking that they've seen conflicting information about taking zinc at the same time as folic acid. What would you recommend about that? And also in terms of choosing a pregnancy supplement, how should someone sort of choose a reputable pregnancy supplement? What advice would you give to someone? Because there's so many out there. You just go to Holland & Barrett or something and there's like kind of rows of it. So what would you recommend?
Yeah. I wouldn't actually recommend a pregnancy supplement in itself, because they contain so many vitamins and minerals that are abundant in a whole food plant-based diet. So it's a bit of, you know, and like I said earlier, some of the doses are very high. So I wouldn't actually recommend taking a zinc supplement anyway if you're following a diverse diet. I would only recommend taking the B12, vitamin D and iodine and the folic acid. And you can actually buy one supplement with the B12, vitamin D and iodine in, and then buy a separate folic acid supplement. And you don't need to spend a fortune on folic acid supplements. They're really, really cheap, and they all do, you know, the same thing. There is a vegan society supplement that you can take that contains all of those things apart from folic acid. So
I think it's a smaller amount than it's about half.
Yeah.
Of the,
yeah. So definitely take a separate folic acid supplement as well. But that supplement is brilliant because it has the 2.5 micrograms of B12, it has the vitamin D, it has the 150 micrograms of iodine. So you're covered if you take that one supplement.
Definitely. So I just want to say to everyone who we couldn't answer everyone's questions, there is one that I want to end with, because you did touch on it, but just about soya in a bit more detail, because I can see people messaging me privately about soya and asking questions about it. Always comes up when it comes to fertility, particularly male fertility. What are your thoughts on soya and the different types of soya, and what should people who are plant-based be eating soya?
So I think that you should be eating 2 portions of soya, and so that equates to 80 grams of tofu or tempeh, edamame beans, also soya milk as well. It's 200 mils as a portion of soya milk, and it's a really great source of unprocessed plant-based protein. And tempeh especially is fermented, so it's good for your gut, it's healthy for your gut, and it's so you can do anything with it. You can marinate it and throw it in pasta dishes or curries, or anything. You can have it on homemade pizzas, salads, and the list is endless. So I would, there's no harm at all in including soya in your diet.
No effect on reproductive health and on testosterone levels or anything, and all the other nutrients that you talked about in the presentation, like iron and calcium and everything, so minimally processed or relatively unprocessed soy is what we really want to be focusing on. Like you mentioned, all the tofu, tempeh, edamame, rather than, you could have the occasional soy burger or something like that, but the less processed the better when it comes to soy, eating it in a more food form.
Yes, I would avoid the more processed forms, because they're not good for your health, and for your general health anyway. So I would avoid taking those, and also please avoid protein powders as well, because I think a study was done in 2018 that showed that about 140 of them, even the vegan ones, are contaminated with heavy metals, and that happens during the processing. And they're also a processed form of protein, so avoid the protein powders.
Yeah, you can get everything you need from food. Well, I think that wraps it up. It's 8:10, and we had such a great session. I think everyone has learned so much. I know that we didn't get to answer everything, but you can follow Lisa and have a look at the fact sheet, because it has so much information on fertility and everything that you need to know. So do have a look at that. And I just want to thank you again, Lisa, for putting so much effort into this presentation and bringing your wealth of knowledge to the screen.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Really great, and look forward to seeing everyone in 2 weeks' time for a conversation about plant-based diets for children, which is such a hot topic. And even if you do not have children but you're a healthcare professional, this is something that comes up all the time, and I'm really excited for that one. I know that you're raising your children plant-based, Lisa, so great to see you at that one.